So let's take a look at these photos. So this is, you can just kind of barely see in the, I don't think I can show you my mouse, but this is going to be the base plate of a batch box. And right behind it is, you can see the opening. I already have this half barrel bench all built. So I'm just going to build this front end and place it in front of it and stack it up. Now you can see I did some tricky stuff in my, these are my early castings. Again, this is like 2012 probably. So you can see I'm trying to figure out ways that I can just fit these things together. And I talked earlier about a shiplap. So in this case, I have a little tab that sticks up, and then I did do a little rabbet in the bottom of the side plates. Now, one of the things we were talking about earlier about cracking, if I remember correctly, these base plates did crack, and they'd usually crack kind of right here in the port section, which of course would be the hottest section. I made a few of these similar, never the same. They were always iterations. But so there's the base plate. And then you can see just one half of a side. Now at this time, I was experimenting with windows was my big focus here. This was at the time when the batch box was brand new. People were still saying you couldn't put windows in rocket mass heaters, and I was pushing pretty hard for the idea that you could. So my first experiment, these are some of my early experiments with windows. Now, what's fun about this one is this is such an obvious mistake, and I can't believe I didn't pick it up, but it just shows you how much of a rookie I was and how much I was learning what a beginner. But I cast this, and I cast it so that this window fit in here, and it was so tight. It wasn't cast in, I pushed it in there after the thing was done, but I didn't leave any expansion joint, right? And so that was totally a beginner move. The window cracked to pieces instantly, but not only that, it cracked this, obviously there's not much material here, but it cracked this refractory piece as well from the expansion. And so this is one of my first lessons in differing materials and expansion and contraction. It wasn't my first. I'd played with metal and stuff before and was aware, but I had no idea that glass was going to do that. So live and learn. Now this is early days. Peter still had the secondary air coming in from the top, and to make my casting easier, I guess or maybe we weren't even hadn't determined that yet. This is really early. This was active days on Donkey's board, and I think the batch box is really just in development. And so my secondary air is going right into the port. We know now that's a mistake, but at the time it seemed like an easy way to manufacture it. And you can see again, I've got this little shiplap. I guess it's a shiplap, it wasn't rabbet, on both top and bottom. And I made this whole thing in just these 4 pieces, or maybe even 3. I don't remember if I cast the top. We'll find out in a second here. But the 2 sides and the base. And there you can see them, how they came together to form that whole piece. Now I set that on some ceramic fiberboard. So it's pretty interesting. Like, I already have ceramic fiberboard, but I haven't quite figured it out yet, that I don't need all of this other stuff. But, eventually I'll get there. So yeah, so I did. I cast a top, and then I put ceramic fiberboard on top of that. What a goofball. I should have done that the other way around. But as you can see, a cast top with those same shiplap joints that capture that, and it's probably got a cast hole in it and a cast hole for the secondary air, and then that window opening. So there's kind of how it comes together. This was one, again, I was experimenting with windows, so I wanted to have windows on both sides. This was kind of one of my outdoor seating builds, with the idea being that it's going to throw heat from the firebox, light and heat from down low, from 3 sides, the 2 sides and the front door. And then the barrel up top will, of course, heat all the air around the seating area, and then the seating as well was heated. I got to tell you guys, still to this day, this really was probably the nicest outdoor fire experience I've ever had. It really was capable of creating, like we would used to call it, the heat bubble. And it took an enormous amount of wood, which I had at the time. And we were, young and enthusiastic, younger and enthusiastic. And, we'd sit out there late into the night drinking beers and playing guitars and whatever. And it could be, here in Washington, it could be 40 degrees outside even, in September at night, and this thing would just create this dome of heat, that metal barrel just blasting heat out into space, the glass heating your body with the radiative heat, and then sitting on those hot rocks. It was really wonderful. It really, really worked well. So you can see it kind of coming together. I'm starting to sort of think about how I'm going to finish it with rock and whatever. So it's a simple build, though. There's just a ceramic fiber riser sleeve sitting on top of the base core build. So as you can see, I'm starting to kind of put together the pieces where we're at now. I just still had a real, labor-intensive and expensive lower end. But I've already figured out you can just set this preformed riser sleeve on top and you're ready to go. So kind of starting to move towards where we are today. So here you see it kind of all finished out. And actually, let me go back for a sec. This is it. I just think that I didn't do an arch on the front. Yeah, Tall Shadow, I thought you guys would enjoy this. Thanks for giving me some feedback. I hope it is it's interesting. It's old news now, but I think it's important to kind of retread this stuff because sometimes you forget where you've been, and so this might help keep people from treading over old ground, or maybe give you some ideas of something you want to revisit. But so anyways, you can see how I finished it, and this actually, a lot of data from doing this I still retain and use all the time when I am consulting with you guys or with anybody in my consulting work here. Tons of stuff I learned on this build that still is relevant, and one of the most important ones is what we're looking at right here. Absolutely experimental, didn't expect it to work at all, but what I did was I put outside of that core, I don't remember if I put any ceramic fiberboard. I don't think I did. I think I just put Hardboard. So I think that I just put a piece of Hardboard here as an outer skin, and then I used Type S mortar, regular Type S tile mortar, to bond this tile to that hardy backer. And that's the same construction you'd use to build a shower or whatever. And so this is Type S mortar here in between the, oh, you can't see my mouse, but in between the rocks around the perimeter, those small kind of flat rocks, and that kind of backsplash looking tile that surrounds the window there. That's all that stuff is stuck on there with Type S mortar. Much to my surprise, that never failed. And I burned this thing a lot, and it was outside for a couple winters, probably actually 5 winters, but I used it for at least a few of those before it eventually got torn down. And incredible heat and cool cycles. That thing must have been sitting there at 1,000 degrees sometimes. It wasn't that hot, but the outside temp surface, I bet, got to 500 degrees on multiple occasions. And then it would freeze at night, and surprisingly enough, that tile facade held up to all that abuse. Outside in the rain and the snow and the freezing and the burned summers and winters, it was unbelievable. So to this day, I still feel like that's a really interesting option for finishing any of our builds, like even our brick cook stoves now. A sheet of hardy backer kind of fastened to those bricks. You can use masonry fasteners to screw it to the bricks, and it doesn't need to be sealed behind. That little bit of airspace would probably help with just a little bit of insulation. And then Type S mortar with tile over the front. As long as the tiles weren't too big, I think if you use big tiles you might have problems, but as long as the individual tiles were relatively modest in size, I think you can expect reasonable success with bonding and holding up to thermal cycling. So Tall Shadow says, looks like a toilet seat for the front door, and it certainly does. And what it is it's another one of these windows. I found these pieces of Robacks on eBay, and they were for some specific wood stove, and so they had an arched side, which looks nice when you put them that way. But since I used it here, and so it's got an arched piece. Now this door was just a dead simple piece. You can actually kind of see it right there, how it's just a flat piece of steel, like 12 gauge steel, and then I cut, there's just tabs that I bent out of it, and they clip that glass in place. You can kind of see them there, those little clips. So that glass piece is just clipped into a little really thin and flimsy steel frame, but it allowed me to attach hinges. And one of the biggest issues with this build, you'll see it right here, is look, how narrow I made it. There's no room at all on the front, and then I just put hardy backer on the sides. So I didn't give myself any meat. It was dumb, right? Now I know way better. There was no way to mount a door because there's no face at all to that whole thing. So that became one of my challenges, was how to deal with that. So yeah, so here's the finish. It actually came out, for me, who doesn't usually do much finish work, it came out to be a pretty neat finished stove. And while I haven't pursued it, I would like to someday follow this idea kind of out to a nicely finished conclusion somewhere indoors. Like if I build myself a little Belgian Gulch style brick shack, I might revisit this idea, both of a window down low, like a windowed stove, which I haven't really prioritized for a long time, and the tile finish. That's just a pretty nice looking stove. Now here's an example of it in use. You can see I've got a friend here, a little chihuahua there on the couch, and a friend laying there, and you can see how well this thing obviously is throwing heat out. There's a barrel here throwing heat out, so just tons and tons of thermal action right there, and then you're laying, of course, on a warm bench. So while we are on that one, let me scroll down here, and in this same batch of photos, just bear with me, gang, I have the mold that I used for that casting. So here you can see on the, right, I wish I could point this to you. I'm not sure if I can do that. Maybe, no, not there. Let's see, this is window capture. Let's see. No. I was hoping it would let me show you the mouse, but it doesn't seem like it's going to. At any rate, this is the mold that I used to cast that batch box, and it's built out of pink or blue insulation foam. You can see that in the back. Actually, you can see the materials in the background nicely. The pink and blue insulation foam make up the main body of the mold, and then I used foam rollers, like 6-inch foam rollers, for the riser castings. And you can see I just used like packing tape to tape this little window cutout onto the firebox, and then there's my port and secondary air piece. We're moving kind of right to left here, and then you can see the half riser there. And so to build both sides, I would just cut this apart and move these pieces to the opposite end of the casting board, and in that way I could get mirror image pieces out of that mold. So I do I have an image of casting this one? I don't think I do, but I have an image of casting the iteration right before this, and it's actually even more interesting. So let's go to that one. So before I figured out the foam, I was often using masonite or hardboard. So actually I just got the wrong one there. Let me get this one. So here's an example that I was talking about earlier of doing cool shapes. Now this is prior to the final iteration of the batch box. And so here I am experimenting with an early port that was offset and designed to create, in my mind, create a better vortex. Of course, that's a common thought, right? We all think that when we start that we're going to do a better vortex by shooting things in at a tangent to the right. To find out that doesn't work very well, but I thought this was an interesting example because you can really see how you can play with shapes here. So this is a window box that's out to the front. That's why those little pieces are out front, is it's blocking out for a window. And then the rest of that makes up the secondary air stuff, and it's there to mate with these riser sleeves. So Tall Shadow says, did you use any mold release agent and reuse of the mold or one-time use? So Tall Shadow, these hardboard molds were one-time use, and I would burn them out. The foam molds that I showed you earlier were multiple uses, and I would use packing tape, and then I would use carnauba wax as mold release. So I would just use car wax. You can buy mold releasing wax, and it's just pure carnauba wax. So that's all I did. I did also use, I was really experimenting with sort of advanced stuff. There was, at this time, I think we were using an EVA spray over some of these molds. I had been doing a ton of gel coat work in this time. I was working in the boatyard to the detriment of my health, and I was doing a lot of composite work, and so I was building at that time tons of like fiberglass molds, building water tanks and whatever people needed in their boats. And so we had EVA mold release, which I had a cup gun for, and a spray thing. And EVA, kind of makes like a membrane over stuff, and then it usually peels away. So I tried a bunch of different mold release tactics. The foam, the best method for mold release, in my opinion, with that was just packing tape to get a really smooth finish, and then just carnauba wax, and that worked really pretty darn well. But with these hardboard ones, I would just burn them away. So at any rate, this was an interesting design because this is my first Walker stove. So the first Walker stove I designed and built, I had thought up the metal. I'd been building stoves in my bedroom. I'd been trying to come up with like a portable wood stove style rocket mass heater, and I had come up with that Walker stove box, but the batch box wasn't, Peter hadn't published his finished stuff yet, so I'm kind of trying to come up with the core. And at Donkey's Board, we were all working towards the batch box, but we didn't know what the best shape was. So this one has this offset riser, and I think if I move through these, I think you guys will enjoy seeing this process. But there is my outer mold, that piece I just showed you fits into, we can actually go back and look at this a little bit closer. Here's some detail on this part here. This is really the port, and I remember that I tried to make the back side of the port, see how this slopes down and it's higher here. So the idea being that there would be the low lip of the port overhanging would be forward facing the firebox, and then this would be higher, so it would be in a vacuum, so there'd be a bit of a venturi there to draw air into the port. So you could add those details in the castings. You can see the way this slopes down right here. So there's that going into the riser, and then I build it in this box, and I'm going to fill the outside with castable refractory there. Now I will vibrate the box using, usually what I would use is I'd use my reciprocal saw, a Sawzall, and I would just take the blade out and put the foot of it against the side of the box. That does a pretty good job of vibrating. I tried to make everything hollow so that when I burned things out, there would be some air to flow through and let this burn out. And Tall Shadow says they look really cool, only to be burnt away. And totally. And so this is a big part of why I don't do this anymore, is because, as you can see, there's a ton of prep work and work involved, not to mention the expense, before you even get to, you know, close to a stove, where these pieces could easily just be ceramic fiber board and you'd be up and running in an hour. Tons of work. Those molds, by the way, to fasten them all together, they were all hot glued together. So it was hardy backer and hot glue. And then a solid build here. Let's see, I don't know. We're just looking at my shop. There's a pallet of materials from offloaded off a truck from a company. There's ceramic fiber board in the boxes underneath the risers, and then bags of refractory. This was, I think, the thousands of dollars. But at the time I was really focused on experimenting. And right next to that you can see my box, my original prototype Walker stove steel box there. So I'm trying to get to, here we are. So here it is. It's now out of, I've taken off the outer mold, but you can see here's the inner mold still in here. Okay, this is that original box we were looking at. There's a little piece sticking out the top and the ceramic fiber riser. And you can see, maybe it's kind of dark, but you can see that window frame. So that was just made to connect with the outer mold. And in that way, it kept that window space open. I think I, again, hot glued that to the outer side. And I'm having a hard time seeing what I'm even taking a picture of here. Basically, it's just the Walker stove coming together, and I have two of them here, as you can see. And I tried two different cores, but you can see that cutout for the window there matches that window on the side of my core, right? So that's what this core was going towards. So eventually, that core drops into that lower trough, that lower piece there, and I start burning. And as you can see now here, I'm starting to just sort of document these early burns. This is before the wood stove decathlon. Peter's working furiously on documenting the batch box, and in probably just a month or two after building this one, I'm going to build the second iteration with a proper port centered into the riser, and that's the one that I'll take to Washington, D.C. But at any rate, you can see some of the handiwork that went into this. I used one of my boat building buddies. I hired him to do the TIG welding on there. I didn't do any of that TIGging, but he really did a wonderful job. And I still really like this whole concept and this stove. I think it's you know, it's a viable concept for the right person in the right situation. But so there's the one I'm going to take to Washington, D.C. I just kind of dressed it up, painted it a little better. I keep thinking I'm going to get some pictures of the inside assembly in here so I can show you how it went together. But it doesn't seem like I am getting there. Let me scroll through up top. So no, it doesn't look like I'm gonna get there. But at any rate, it sure looked cool when it was burning, didn't it? I mean, it's really a spectacular stove. So that's my let me get back over here. All right, so that's the chat about casting and building things that way, and a little bit of a view into some of my old experiments.